Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio.
And y'all are back on our again, meaning, yes, we're talking more trauma-related reactions or diagnosis. And this time, we're coming with maladaptive daydreaming, or MD, as they are giving those initials for it. And yes, this is, I don't know, I guess I have we should do a small playlist of all of the mental health and trauma things that I have brought in, or we have brought in from oh yeah, that sounds like me. Oh, why y'all gotta call me out like that, social media? Because we talk a lot about different types of diagnosis or disorders, or even just responses, trauma responses to different things that may not triggered us, or things that we did not realize could be a learned behavior. And I think it's fascinating. Again, this comes back from my background in social work and doing a lot of this type of work because, mental health and social work go hand in hand. Especially, we know a lot of LCSWs are now counselors. But with all of that, yes, this is what I love to do. And this is something that I thought was fascinating because I don't think this is necessarily me, but I have seen this reaction. And surprisingly, I will say I have not seen too much saying this is related specifically more to women. Although when I was looking at the amount of diagnosis for women, what are women most likely diagnosed with, and who has the higher diagnosis for different types of disorders, women do hit anxiety and depression, obviously, and PTSD at a higher mark than men. According to much of the research that I've seen, as in fact, there's been an overwhelming, in the last year, and I do want to come back to this because I think it's fascinating, call and high alert to let people know and let professionals know, hey, women are being diagnosed alarmingly, way higher than they have been in years for things like depression, anxiety, and PTSD and all of that. And we need to look at why. I have a feeling it may have something to do with our social structure.
I do as well.
but I'm going to leave it at that. Hey, we got one victory. But the Supreme Court did strike down the ban for mifepristone, and holy yay. I was actually shocked that it was unanimous.
Yeah, I was too.
I hope they understood. The questioning was pretty intense, and I think they knew what they were looking at, being side-eye, what are you doing? Because even though, yes, it is a part of the abortion pill, it's also been around for other things. We've talked about this completely. We've talked about this in our book and why it's important, and it's absurd because they want to be jerks. That's how I'm going to put it. But with all of that, I'm wondering if some of these diagnoses that have happened as of recently, or it may be just that more women are realizing that they do need help and they're tired of being gaslit by so many people saying that you're just sad, suck it up. And so actually going to seek help. So there's so many things that so many of us have decided, hey, we actually do care about our health and there is something wrong. So let's talk about this. And whether it's counseling or actual medication, or it's for, sometimes you just need prescription for time off, an actual mental health day that we've been promised for so many years that is oftentimes ridiculed. But anyway, so with that, I do want to come and talk about that. But today we are talking about maladaptive daydreaming, again, MD. And according to sleepfoundation.org, it is, quote, sometimes known as a daydreaming disorder. Maladaptive daydreaming describes a condition where a person regularly experiences daydreams that are intense and highly distracting, so distracting, in fact, that the person may stop engaging with the task or people in front of them. These daydreams may be triggered by real-life events or stimuli such as noise, smell, conversation, topic, or movie. And so this is very descriptive about what it is. And we're going to get a little more into it. We're not talking about daydreaming. I do have that question because I know we've all done this. We have all done this while we were driving, having our own thought process and then realizing, holy crap, how did I end up here? How did I make it home? Because I don't remember the last 10 minutes of my driving. I know we've all done that. There is a difference between daydreaming and just being distracted versus maladaptive daydreaming. And we want to make sure that we're going to understand that a little better in our short segment on Monday Minis. Yes. Again, I do want to say that I did not find too much information about it being gendered other than that the original research for this diagnosis and for this term, when they asked for volunteers, and I believe it was mainly through like social media that they were trying to get contacts from people to test them and to kind of have that random subject. A lot of it turned out to be women who came back with actual examples. So they were kind of like, is it because of how we researched it, or is it because women are more likely to suffer from maladaptive daydreaming? They also talk about marginalized individuals, such as the trans community as well, talking about whether it is actually because they are more aware and they're more willing to be a part of this project, or is it because of the actual trauma that they have gone through that this is that defense mechanism. So there seems to be a lot of questions. I know there's a lot of testing, and honestly, in the last 2 years, it really got a big bang and big pull thanks to social media. So more and more people are talking about it, and I think more and more people are actually researching it. So with that, according to the National Library of Medicine for the National Center of Biotechnology of Information, they say maladaptive daydreaming, MD, is a proposed mental disorder characterized by excessive compulsive immersion in vivid and complex fantastical daydream plots, generating intense emotional involvement, often accompanied by stereotypical movements. This addictive absorption in daydreaming becomes maladaptive as it consumes many hours a day, generates shame or guilt, hinders achievement of short and long-term goals or tasks, and overall causes clinically significant distress and or interferes with functioning in society or occupational realms. So I definitely have friends who were a part of, like, who would disappear in their bedroom for hours at a time. And I'd ask what they're doing, and literally they're just sitting in there. And they don't tell me that they're daydreaming, but I'm wondering perhaps if that's what was happening, because they weren't necessarily reading, they weren't necessarily taking, like they were just in there. I have been caught, embarrassing moment for me, where I am like spewing conversations to myself in a bedroom, like by myself for like 30 minutes to an hour at a time. And I've been asked, who are you talking to? Have you ever had those moments, Anne? No? Just me?
No. This is interesting because, again, a lot of times when we like split up the research, I don't know what the topic will be that Samantha's bringing. And I have said before, and it's still true, one of my very favorite things to do is in that moment when you wake up and it's too early to get up, is I daydream. But it's never been like I'm in front of a person. Like it feels more like
you set a time for it.
Yeah, like I'm in bed and I'm not going to get up, so I'm just going to daydream. So I'm interested to see if at the end of this I'm going to be like, oh no, I've got an issue. But it's never been like I'm talking to a person, or I feel like it's impacting my job or something like that.
Right. Yeah. And that's part of the conversation. So it continues, maladaptive daydreamers, MDers, report a strong urge to daydream whenever they can, and annoyance whenever they cannot, and repeated unsuccessful efforts to control, cut back, or stop daydreaming like other behavioral addictions. Negative emotions follow their daily daydreaming activity. However, mental health practitioners are often disparaging of their problem, resulting in suboptimal treatment and heightened loneliness and distress. And just in case you're wondering if this applies to you, they compare the norm versus MD. They say, importantly, different types of mental states in which one does not focus on the present may be associated with psychological difficulties such as rumination, worry, thinking about the past or future, or mind wandering. However, MD is essentially different than normal daydreaming and mind wandering, defined quite broadly as internally generated or off-task thought. Widespread daydreaming or mind wandering is often a spontaneous divergence from a present task in favor of past or future recollections, such as activating a memory or thinking about one's to-do list for the rest of the day. Self-report mind-wandering items span inattention and concentration difficulties, a scattered line of thought, making mistakes due to automatic behavior, and obliviousness to surroundings. On the contrary, MD is characterized by inventing rich, fantastical plots and stories with a dynamic emotional range that are often unrealistic and distant from the daydreamer's actual life. Moreover, they're usually continuously evolving over long periods of time, like a soap opera, which is very different than the somewhat random, fickle contents of common mind wandering. In MD, individuals feel compelled to continue their fantasy, like many people would feel about watching their favorite show on TV, and many report that they initiate the MD episode with awareness and intent.
I did do that, and I have talked about that on a previous podcast. When I was in middle school, I had a dream, and I could initiate it, and it was ongoing, and I would treat it like a TV show. I didn't know it was going to happen. But it still was when I was sleeping.
Right.
It was still a not happening during the day.
Yeah.
That did ring pretty true for me.
Here's a bit more information from wondermind.com. Daydreaming actually exists on a spectrum. On one end, you have the mind-wandering type of daydreaming, which is brief, typical, mundane in subject matter, and doesn't impair functioning in any way, says Eli Sommer, a PhD, a clinical psychologist, and maladaptive daydreaming researcher specializing in trauma and dissociative disorders. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have maladaptive daydreaming, a term coined by Dr. Sommer himself in a 2002 qualitative study of 6 patients in his practice, where he describes it as, quote, extensive fantasy activity that replaces human interaction and or interferes with academic, interpersonal, or vocational functioning. In fact, there will be a clear, immersive visuals, sounds, and emotional elements, so they're way more intense than the run-of-the-mill daydreams and typically include elaborate storylines that continue over time, he adds. So basically, it's when you daydream so vividly and frequently that it negatively impacts your life. So I don't think you would be maladaptive daydreaming, but you are intensely daydreaming because you don't allow it to actually take over your daily life. You're not annoyed that you have to do something instead of being able to daydream. However, you are very intensely. So I'm assuming with everything else in diagnosis, it would be a spectrum. So again, and I wanted to put this out because the research I'm looking into, I can't tell if it's actually been proposed to put into the DSM-5 as an actual disorder. And I think that's where it is. Social workers, psychologists, researchers out there, let me know if I'm going all off on this. But I think they have proposed it, but has not officially been submitted and or admitted into the DSM-5. But people do recognize it in the community. So they may not say it's a disorder. They might not actually say that out loud, but they have seen it and they know that it exists. And then there are those who do feel very strongly that it should be added to the DSM-5 because it can be an impairment. And they've even talked about how it could be a comorbidity to other diagnoses. But before we jump into that, here's some actual symptoms. According to healthline.com, a person with maladaptive daydreaming may experience one or more of the following: extremely vivid daydreams with their own characters, settings, plots, and other detailed story-like features reflecting a complex inner world, daydreams triggered by real-life events, difficulty completing everyday tasks, difficulty sleeping at night, an overwhelming desire to continue daydreaming, performing repetitive movements while daydreaming, making facial expressions while daydreaming, whispering and talking while daydreaming, daydreaming for lengthy periods up to several hours, significant distress about daydreaming, awareness that the internal fantasy world is different from the external reality. And I feel like the awareness part should be a good thing, shouldn't it?
Yeah, I feel, again, as someone who is connecting to a lot of this pretty hard, I feel like the difference would be, hey, this is my daydream. This is reality. I can't daydream all the time. I will tell you, sometimes when I'm working, I'll get the pull, but I don't do it. Or it doesn't stop it's more of oh, I wish I could do that right now, but I can't. So it sounds like more of the compulsion or the control of it.
Right.
So I do think recognizing the difference is a good thing. That sounds like a really good thing.
It's also part of the diagnosis, apparently.
Yeah.
And there are likelihoods that maladaptive daydreaming is a comorbidity to other diagnoses, including ADHD, OCD, borderline personality disorder, PTSD, and many more. And here's a quote from that Healthline article talking about ADHD and MD. Experts have found links between maladaptive daydreaming and ADHD. A 2017 study looked at 39 people with maladaptive daydreaming. Almost 77% of the participants had both maladaptive daydreaming and ADHD. So I've never really I don't necessarily think I have ADHD. I think I'm very easily distracted though. So like, and I'm also, maybe I do. Maybe I'm in denial because I'm like, I don't have all the other factors except for when it comes to actually working, and I'll do everything but work. And that includes daydreaming. I will say that, like, about possibilities of our podcast or our episodes, whether it's me thinking about it or whether me talking through it as if like this is going to be amazing, or interviewing, talking about it. I feel like I'm calling myself out a lot in this episode. Anyway. And then from the Guardian article written in 2022, they write, intriguingly, maladaptive daydreaming seems to be far more common among people who have been diagnosed with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, with a recent paper reporting a prevalence of about 20%. Moreover, 77% of people with maladaptive daydreaming have been diagnosed with ADHD. The constant desire to slip into daydreams, it seems, is contributing to difficulties in concentration and focus, and this group may require different forms of treatment from other people with ADHD. So they're saying that they need to approach it differently, which, again, may be why they want this diagnosis so much, or a disorder placed in the DSM-5, because they'll be able to have a conversation about what that treatment looks like. And from several of the articles, including research articles, they talk about using OCD type of treatments for maladaptive daydreaming, and whether or not it's been successful, I think it's a little early to tell. They also have an actual questionnaire for you to find your own spectrum. So this is with Sommer and his researching team. It says in the actual scale, the 16-item maladaptive dreaming scale, MDS-16 is what it's called. In answering the following questions, please refer to your daydream activities in the last month. If not otherwise specified, choose the option that best fits you. So they give you that 0 to 100%, 0 being never to 100% being extremely frequent, with 16 questions. And based on that, they give you this diagnosis. I'm not really sure how verified. I mean, I don't know if that's just like how they tested for themselves for their research, because this was from the original research team versus like, yes, this is effective. So like one of the questions is, some people notice that certain music can trigger their daydreaming. To what extent does music activate your daydreaming? So you would have that scale. Another question is, if you go through a period of time when you're not able to daydream as much as usual due to real world obligations, how distressed are you by your inability to find time to daydream? So they're talking about the level, like what does it cause you? Some people experience difficulties in controlling or limiting their daydream. How difficult has it been for you to keep your daydreaming under control? So like they have all these questions on here. It says, how often are your current daydreams accompanied by physical activity such as pacing, swinging, or shaking your hands? And I found that interesting because like this whole conversation really was like, one of the videos I saw was a woman talking about she was on her walking machine and she was in her own mind daydreaming. But in that daydream, she ended up being on that thing for like 3 hours or something. Like it was an extensive amount of time without her realizing, which I'm like, no, I know when I'm doing physical activity. I don't like it. I don't want to. I wish I could zone out like that. But like, I found it interesting that people really did have those moments with this. And again, like I said, the more content that I'm looking at, and maybe it's because what the FYP I'm on, the research that I'm on, it is based on a lot of examples on women or people who are in that type of community. And it, again, may have everything to do with who is more willing to take these tests, who are being found through social media, what's their FYP, all these different things. But it was a pretty fascinating conversation. And again, like what type of diagnosis? This would be so new for DSM-5. Is it necessary? And it would like explain so much for people, because I know the one thing about the shame part about like feeling guilty for being an adult that daydreams about things when I should be like locked into reality and following my responsibility, that this has maybe been underdiagnosed or ignored for so long and shamed for so long that many people don't even want to look at it as a possible, oh, this is maybe a mental health issue.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot we could come back and talk about with all of this.
Yes.
Because it just makes sense to me if you've gone through any kind of trauma or anything like that you would have this thing that you went to.
I also want to know how many authors and fanfic writers would be diagnosed with this.
I'm thinking about my own thing, and I'm like, this is where I get a lot of my good ideas, and you're telling me it's bad?
I'm not saying it's bad, but it can be disruptive to some people.
Yes. We should come back. I'm always worried I'll get to the end of one of these episodes, Samantha, and you'll be like, and this is you.
I mean, there maybe feel like this is us.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Wow, listeners, if you have any thoughts about this or any resources, please let us know. You can email us at stuffmediamomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at momstuffpodcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff Never Told You. We're on YouTube. We have a TeePublic store, and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, our executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your favorite shows.